Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Breaking the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm your host, Stephen Gillespie, and joining me is friend of the show and substitute fill-in co-host, Jurgen Coney. Jurgen, what's up, man?
Nothing much, Steven. Pleasure to be recording this with you. We talked about before the show. I always love when you and Austin have me on and that you guys trust me. And I'm always excited when you have me talking, helping you out with someone that knows basketball. And we have another case like that today. I'm excited, man.
Yeah, man. And, Austin's my dude, and he had stuff come up today, no emergency. So if you're kind of thinking something bad's happening with Austin, it's just, a scheduling thing, but not a big deal. We got Jurgen, and Jurg, you alluded to the fact that we got a cool guest on today. Who we have on is Max Van Auken. He is the host of the Max Van Auken podcast, or the MVP show. He is a radio personality on 104.7, and he's also affiliated with Sports Talk 2319. Max, how's it going, man?
I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you for the kind words. Everything is going great. Every day, just grateful. Everything is going on. One thing about 2020 made me just kind of appreciate everything a little bit more. And so just coming on shows and talking with you guys, it's always great. So I appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have you, man. It's a real treat and a real honor to have you on. I've worked with similar people who you've worked with. It's nice that our connections finally lined up to where we could have each other on. And I've been looking for an opportunity to have you on. So just again appreciate your time. But before we get into our our show and what we planned on covering, if you just want to take a little bit of time and let the people know, what you do for 2319. What you do on 104.7, things like that.
Okay, sure. So first I have the Max Van Auken podcast, the MVP. My name can be hard to spell, so it was just either abbreviations worked out perfectly with that. So it's a sports podcast where talk NBA, of course, because I cover the Orlando Magic. So a lot of my NBA interviews would be on there, but also a lot of radio personalities, podcasts, other hosts of podcasts, UFC fighters, talk NFL. So really just talk a little bit of everything and try to get as many different perspectives as possible. It's one thing I love about doing podcasts is I get to learn from so many different people. So that's first. And then I also, like I said, covered the Orlando Magic, and that's also for 104.7 right here in my hometown, Daytona Beach, Frank Scott. And then definitely work very closely with Rashad Phillips, a part of Sports Talk 2319, and what he's been able to teach me and what he's really building over there is truly special. So being able to work with him and Dom and Tina and Kate, it's just been incredible. So I work very closely with them day in and day out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do good work, man. And I'm thrilled to death to have you on. Jurg, I know we spoke offline about this as well. I know you're looking forward to the conversation as well, man.
Yep. Always love talking to someone that knows the game. I always like learning something. Whenever we have someone that knows so much, I love taking information. So like I said, I'm excited for this.
It's the best. I appreciate that. Likewise, the feeling is definitely mutual. I know what you're feeling. It's one thing I love about podcasts and talking with other people is you don't have to agree with me, or I may not agree with you, but I can take away something. I can learn something.
Oh yeah.
And from you and your perspective. Oh, I didn't look at the game that way, or I didn't see it that way. And it just allows me to kind of learn a little bit. So that's why I love doing it.
Absolutely. It's good stuff. Well, Max, we're going to go ahead and get into it now. And we've had some people on talking about the All-Star voting, and I'm really interested to get your take on this. Well, first off, I just want to share with you my feelings on All-Star voting. I think as fans, we're kind of spoiled that we get as much say in it as we do. And I probably wouldn't feel this way if guys didn't literally have money on the line for this. And I don't know if you've had much time to look at the second return to the fan votings, but they're probably just as head scratching, if not more, as the first round that we had. And what are your overall feelings on fan voting for All-Star games? First off,
no, I completely understand where you're coming from on that perspective. Like I saw Alex Caruso was pretty high on the fan voting. I heard Klay Thompson got some votes. I know Carmelo got a lot of votes. So obviously there's going to be head scratchers on there. Like, okay, Alex Caruso. I love Alex Caruso. Don't get me wrong, but he's not an all-star. So I think it's just a way to get fans involved because one thing about the NBA, so the NFL is the most watched, but the NBA is the most talked about. And so it's their way to get people talking. It's especially with today's day and age where I think social media highlights, the NBA definitely dominates with that. So I think it's just their way of engaging everybody. So from a business standpoint, it makes complete sense. But for like purists of the game of basketball, it probably, like to your point, it's a lot of head scratchers on there. We're like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, Jurgen, what's your feeling on this, man? Because I'm looking at the Western Conference. Max just touched on this for the guards. Klay Thompson is 8th. He hasn't even laced them up yet
Right.
at all this season. Alex Caruso is 10th. CJ McCollum, he's had a heck of a year, but he's missed a lot of time. He's 9th right here. And then if you look at the Western Conference front court, Carmelo Anthony is he's 10th place right now
Right.
in the front court vote. In the West alone, we haven't even touched the East yet. Jerk, what do you think about this?
So, like, I'm very 50-50 on it. Like, I definitely agree with you guys. I think, like, as fans, we don't realize how much of a privilege it kind of is to be able to vote. And not just with the NBA and the other sports as well, and the NFL and the MLB and the NHL. Like, we literally have a say in who makes it to the All-Star game. But we're not realizing, like you said, Steven, the financial implications for these guys to have to make the All-Star game or the Pro Bowl. Like, it's significant. It's a lot more important than people realize, because while some players, it's kind of like they're kind of iffy 50-50 on it, other guys know, like, okay, if I rack up a couple of appearances, this will help me out on my next contract. And with the NBA and the last collective bargaining, with, I think it's the Rose Rule, when you hit a certain amount of milestones, that it allows you to negotiate for even more money. So the fact that certain players aren't getting enough votes or enough recognition, or like you guys have said, like a Caruso or a Carmelo or a Klay, in their various situations are top 10 in the voting, like that part kind of disappoints me there.
No, that's a great point. That's a fantastic point. I don't mean to cut you off, but with so many different contracts on the line and extensions or qualifications on, hey, how many All-Star selections do you have? That's not, you don't want to play around with someone's money. So to your point, that's a fantastic point.
Yeah. And sometimes it's weird. Like you said, Caruso, remember how many years ago was that at this point that Zaza Pachulia, like, if I'm not mistaken, insane. I think the whole Zaza thing forced the NBA to switch how they get the starters, if I'm not mistaken. Like, that was the last year before they switched it to fans, media, and coaches, or players, excuse me.
Yeah.
Right.
And Max, you don't need to apologize. We want you on here. I was actually going to pose, Jurgen's thoughts to you. So, whenever someone, just jump on in, man. Like, there's no, we have to do, here's the talking stick type thing. So you're all good, man.
Sounds
and,
good.
So we got the Eastern Conference here too, guys. I want to touch on this. Jimmy Butler is 5th on the front court right now, which is, again, head scratching. And then for the guards, we have Derrick Rose is 8th in the Eastern Conference guard spot, and then Fred VanVleet is 10th. He jumped up against Ben Simmons, who isn't on my all-star team right now, but to me, he's more of an all-star right now than Fred VanVleet. So, Max, since we went through kind of the head scratchers in the East and the West Conference, what are some of the names that you agree with who are high up on the list? And then who are some of the guys that you would probably take out if it was left up to you?
Well, when you look at the top of the list, guys like the KDs and the Giannis's, those are like, okay, I completely understand. What I'm really intrigued by is, what do you do with the Bradley Beals, who he averaged 30 points per game and didn't make an all-star team. So what's the difference right now? Because he should have made it before then. And you can't say team success because the Wizards aren't doing well. You also have the Zach LaVines, who's going for 40 every other night. And I really like Colin Sexton's game. And so when you look at these certain players, that's what I'm most intrigued by. Because like I said, the front guys we know who are going to get it deserve it. But I want to see what they do with those guys. I think Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have to be in there. I'm a big fan of Ben Simmons, but to your point, he's not having a better season than Zach LaVine. So when I look at it from that point of view, if you're going statistically, you have to put those guys in there.
Yeah, and Max, I'm interested to get your take on this too. And like you said, everybody feels differently about this, and you can always take away something. What do you think about in the Western Conference right now that right now Utah is one of the more surprising teams in the NBA right now, and we're going to talk more about them later on in the show. But right now, Rudy Gobert isn't in here, and Donovan Mitchell, he is, but he's 4th behind Steph, Luka, and Damian Lillard. So
and by a lot of people, in the voting margin.
Correct. So there are people who have the mindset where if you're the best team in your particular conference, not only should you have an all-star, but there are some people that think that the best team should have two, regardless of what their stat lines look like and stuff like that. Do you kind of subscribe to that as well, or do you look at each individual performance regardless of record?
For the All-Star game, I do individual. I'll do individual. Because if you go through the history of the All-Star game, there's tons of people who didn't really have a lot of success on their teams, but got the All-Star nod because look at their stats. It's ridiculous. And a lot of the times the leading scorers I shouldn't say leading scorers, but a lot of the leading statistical category guys may not always be on the number one or championship type of team. So on that end, I would go individually. But like for an MVP award, that's different. You need to have your team success, and you need to have impact. That's why I've really been critical of the MVP award a lot of times in the past. But with Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz, that's an interesting situation. Because me personally, I don't think Rudy Gobert should get on that list compared to other people, unless you have specific criteria. You need to have this amount of centers on the team. I'm not sure if that's how they're doing it this year because I know they draft the players. But Donovan Mitchell, in my opinion, should certainly be on there. The number one player on the team, on the number one seed in the West. And it's not like we're just giving it to him because they're having team success. The guy's still balling out, too. He still has the stats to back it up.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And right now they're still doing the front court and back court, so there's not the positions. And I think this season, Jerg, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're not doing the draft anymore. It's going to be East versus West this season. They're just starting to implement that back again.
I think so. Yeah, I think that it's one of those special things. Like all these sports trying to do various things to cut down on guys mingling as much as possible. That's what they're trying to do. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure I can confirm it.
Oh man, I really liked the draft too. I thought it had such a different element to it. It just gave you that old pickup ball type of feel where it's like who has first pick. Man.
Yeah, well, Max, I have a theory on why they got rid of it, and I'm kind of curious to see what your take on this is. I think players got tired of being the last guy picked. I legitimately think that feelings got hurt, and that's a reason. Do you think that there's any merit in what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. There's tons of egos involved in the NBA. On top of that, it's also televised, so everybody sees it.
Correct.
So it's not like it's just behind closed doors. Oh, okay, he was the last pick. But me selfishly would disagree with that. Obviously, I'm not in a situation of being drafted, but if you don't want to be picked last, then you got to do better.
Right.
And also, it's not like you're getting picked last in the league or in the world. You're getting picked last in an all-star game. These are the best players in the world. It's not really an insult, in my opinion. It's like, hey, you made the all-star game.
Yeah, but you and I and Jerg too, and Austin as well, we recognize that, like, wow, okay, like even though he's the last pick, he's, the last of the best. Meanwhile, there's people, and you've seen them on Twitter and Instagram and other social media platforms where it's ring culture, right? It's pretty toxic. Like, oh, okay, you lost the game, you're trash, you're a fraud. You don't deserve to be in the NBA. So, and those people also will throw names out on social media and tag said player in them. So I do kind of see where we would think like that, Max, but not everybody else would agree.
That's a great point. Yeah, you can't. Social media has created a false reality, and so a lot of people, it can either it can make or break you. And you see a lot of people get involved with that, and then other people thrive off it because they know how to put the phone down. So to your point, yeah, it could definitely cause some damage.
Yeah, and basically, my thought process lines up with yours too, Max, and Jerg will get to yours too. I think that individual success plays a part in this because, one, it's really hard for a team to succeed if it doesn't have one of the best coaches of all time or LeBron James on the team, basically, right? So you can't judge everyone based on like the 1%, right? So I'm a big fan of Jeremy Grant this season. Not only do I think he should be, most improved player, I think that he deserves to be an all-star regardless of Detroit's record. He's played phenomenal on both ends of the floor. And anybody who's curious on why I feel that way, I would gladly point you to, game film and statistics to be able to back up my take. He's doing a tremendous job. But Jurgen, what's your thought process on how you evaluate all-stars?
For the most part, individually, like the team success thing, I take into account it has to be a situational thing. And what I mean by that is I think there are times where you can say like, okay, this is the best team or a top 2 team. Like they probably do deserve more, 2 All-Stars or more. Like in Miami's 4-year run with the big 3, like you cannot make the argument that all 3 guys shouldn't have made the All-Star team every year. Chris Bosh was such a critical piece, and all the things he did, he deserved to be an All-Star. But then I think it was the 2015 All-Star game where Atlanta ended up being the best team in the East with 60 wins. 4 of their 5 starters were in the All-Star game. Like Millsap and Horford deserved it, but I think the other 2 were Korver and Jeff Teague. And all due respect to both of those guys, should they really have been? So that's why I think you need to go by situation. Like when Boston had their big 3, of course, most likely all 3 guys were getting in. Like this year with Utah, it's a very like 50-50 thing. I think obviously we all agree Donovan Mitchell should get in. Rudy Gobert, I'm kind of on the fence on. Like it's so difficult because when it comes to the bench, it's the coaches. Yep. And the coaches are going to think through their mindset. And in a coach's mindset, they would believe that a Rudy Gobert should be on the All-Star team, as opposed to maybe one of these other guys that may have some more influence on trying to help his team. Like if Bradley Beal was in the West on like a 5-win team, I know they're different positions, but Rudy Gobert would go in over Bradley Beal on some coaches' list because of the way they see it. So that's why sometimes it's a complicated thing when you're talking about the selection process after the starters.
Right. Situation matters no matter what you're breaking down or evaluating. That's a fantastic point. My whole thing is there's not a set criteria on what makes an all-star. Like there's not a set criteria on what an MVP is. There's not a set criteria on what a defensive player of the year is, what a coach of the year is. You have to get X amount of wins, average X amount of points. So it leaves it all for opinions. It's all, what do you look for? What is your definition of valuable? What is your definition of an all-star? Like you said, is it having a strong contribution to the very successful team? And that's probably why Draymond Green is going to be a Hall of Famer. You can't, and again, that's another thing. There's not a set criteria on how to do this. So I think when you leave it up for opinion, that's what we have these great discussions, because there's so many different ways to evaluate it.
100%.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, it's one of those things that has to be fluid. But what I like to do, Max, is I like to hear and take down different takes that I have, and I try to apply that every season, knowing that it's going to blow up in my face. That with the MVP discussion last season, I tried to break down each aspect of it and each angle that everyone was trying to say, and who basically took the most, who won the most out of those takes, and that helped configure who I thought should have been MVP. So you can go down a whole, rabbit hole of spider webs and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, like you said, Max, it's all conjecture and preference, and it's never going to be 100% foolproof plan. Although we crave that it will be someday. Right on. So, all right, Max, I'm interested now. We're going to move on from our all-star discussion to trade talks. We had our first big trade of the regular season so far, and it involved Mr. Derrick Rose going back to New York to play under his beloved coach Tibbs. And the Pistons, in turn, received this year's 2021 second-round pick via the Hornets, which looks like it's not going to be as high as what other people may have anticipated coming into the season. And then a reclamation project in Dennis Smith Jr. Max, when you're evaluating a trade like this, I think obviously, the Knicks, they're the surprise team this season. They're competing for the playoffs. They look like they're going to be, in that mix. Derrick Rose is a 6 Man of the Year caliber player. He's former MVP. He's used to his head coach. It feels like that's the win. Is that where you kind of land on this? Like kind of who wins the trade, or do you believe in, teams winning trades?
Oh, teams definitely win trades. So there's two ways that I look at it. With the NBA, typically whoever gets don't outthink the room. Whoever gets the star player typically wins the trade. Typically, that's how it works. Two, I look at it like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So why did Tom Brady want Gronk in the locker room? Because what they were trying to do was create a culture. And when you bring someone that can vouch for you, hey, this guy is really like this, I can vouch for it. It changed that whole culture. Obviously, Tampa Bay had tons of talent, but it was the culture that they were trying to instill, because it's, let's just be honest, a poorly ran organization in the years prior. So with the Knicks, let's not beat around the bush. This is a terrible culture. This team has just been a very dysfunctional franchise for decades now. So with Tibbs, I think it makes sense on so many levels. Obviously, Derrick Rose can still play and contribute on the court. He's also a veteran at this point in his career with a young team. but also simultaneously, it's buying into what Tibbs is trying to do. So if I've always said well-run organizations and success starts from the top down. It's not a coincidence the Patriots, the Warriors, the Spurs were able to have these dynasties because they were all well-run. And one thing about the Knicks, it doesn't matter how much talent you have. You can look at the Timberwolves, for example. You have Prime KG, MVP. You've had Kevin Love. You have Cat. Doesn't matter who you replace the talent with. If you're not well run, I don't think you can only overcome so much. It takes a generational type of talent to overcome, like a LeBron James. So what the Knicks are trying to do is create a consistent culture. And if they can get that with Tibbs, if they can actually keep this coach and buy into this coach, I think it's a great move because you're trying to create a culture. And Derrick Rose, obviously, him and Tibbs have a great relationship, and he'll vouch for him. But that's if you stay with Tibbs. They kind of flop coaches around like crazy. So if they can stick with this, I like that direction. I've been critical of James Dolan, and obviously he's the owner of the team, so he has the final say. But if this is what their direction is and they stay with it, I like it.
Yeah, Jurgen, and at Off the Ball Network, the network that we're affiliated with, we have no shortage of Knicks fans within our group chats and things like that. And we've had the pleasure of talking to one of our guys. We're gonna leave him nameless here on the show, but love you, by the way, man, if you're listening. Yep. One of the concerns that I had, and it felt like you shared, and Max, after Jurgen and I talk about this, I'd love to get your take as well, is that when you have a hungry franchise who's just desperate for wins, right? And they didn't give up a whole heck of a lot. I think that we would all agree. They gave up Charlotte's second-round pick. Doesn't look like that's going to, equate to much. Granted, you may be able to land, you may beat the odds and get a really good player at wherever he lands, right? But in theory, it's not going to be that great of a second-round pick. And you get Dennis Smith Jr., by all accounts, is probably looked at around the league as a castaway player. You didn't give up a whole lot, and you got a really good guy. But what this does now is that you're competing for the playoffs. You have Tom Thibodeau, who's done a great job, loves winning. I don't know a single coach who doesn't, but he loves winning. And he's going to get the best out of these guys, especially when they're his guys. So when you add a Derrick Rose, you're already competing for the playoffs. Seemingly, you give up nothing for him. You're going to get even better. So you move away from the top of the draft this upcoming season, which, by the way, is loaded with talent. Do you think, Jerg, that this could kind of start a slippery slope of going all in for this season, or do you think that that's looking too far down the road?
It really depends on the organization's mindset. I think I want to believe that with all the changes that have been happening, because it was a complete change. I think one of the smart things the Knicks did in the offseason, it was complete change. Got a new GM/VP of basketball operations, got a new head coach, got a new everything. I think if someone from an older regime was still there, maybe they would push for that. I want to think that in New York, while they're doing so good, I think realistically they could look at it like, okay, Miami has been COVID/injury prone this entire season so far. They literally just got back their best player like a week and a half ago. Mm-hmm. You look at a couple of other teams that are just trying to find a stride here.
Toronto, yeah.
Exactly. Toronto has bounced back off an awful start. Indiana, while here and there, we all know they're still a pretty good team. Brogdon and Sabonis are talented. At Boston, even though they're iffy right now, Jaylen Brown and Tatum and Stevens alone give you hope. So I think you need to be smart with the Knicks. Like you said, Steven, we can all agree this was a lopsided deal. They gave up a bag of balls and a $5 coupon to get Derrick Rose back, essentially. And so if you can swing another deal like that, I actually think you should do it. But if one of these deals may cost you a guy that you think you can turn into something, or if it costs you a first-round pick, like you're not in the position to give up a first-round pick for a player where things could go south. Like, we always talk about the teams that they made this deal and they skyrocketed. Plenty of teams have made a first-round pick deal and so you need to have that foresight. And I think this group of Knicks management and power structure may have that foresight to be like, okay, we're not for a marginal upgrade, not worth giving up too much of the future. Let's stand pat for now. Let's let these guys play,
Yeah, and Max, I'm interested to hear your take on this because right after this deal, their franchise center, Mitchell Robinson fractured his hand. He's going to be out for what they're saying around 6 weeks now. So do you think that they might start making more deals and giving away a little bit more assets to compete even harder this season?
Yeah, because I think you want to do it strategically. To your point, you don't want to just go trading willy-nilly just to trade and say, okay, we're trading. So you don't want to get rid of any of your core, like your foundation. You don't want to get rid of any of your core guys. But what I do think is overrated is draft picks, and I do think aggressive wins. Doing it strategically, but I do think aggressive wins. And what are the Knicks ultimately trying to do? They're trying to create a culture and win.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to attract, Kevin Durant didn't even consider going to the Knicks. He went to Brooklyn. It's like a complete slap in the face.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that? Because he knows these guys aren't winning. This is not what they're trying to do. So I think you're trying to create, you're trying to send a message and ultimately create a culture, and that is win. So if I'm the Knicks, I'm not saying I'm some grand GM, but what I would do is be aggressive and try to make any type of trades that can enhance your team to win now. Because I think the more you win now, the better chance you have of sending a message to the rest of the guys. Hey, look, we're not what you think what we were. We've changed now. And when it gets into that free agency type of season, not only are you the Garden, not only the Mecca, the New York Knicks, now you're a winning culture, or at least on the rise. And I think that's more important than anything. So I would be aggressive in trade now.
That's an interesting take. And Max, I respect your opinion, but here's where I come from now, right? So we're going all in right now this season to compete for, let's just say, anywhere from the 6th through the 8th seed right now. I think that their ceiling to me right now is the 6th seed. At Dallas, they have their first round pick as well for this season, but Dallas, it looks like they're starting to figure things out too. So I don't know if winning at all costs this season makes sense with the talent that's looking like it's going to come in. Cade Cunningham, Suggs, Mobley, Kuminga looks phenomenal already. I'm really high on him. So I don't know how much I would try to win at all costs this season. And that's why I brought this conversation up, because it's, what do you fancy better? And I see where you're coming from, Max, where you want to send a strong message to free agents that you can win here, right? But with the talent that's loaded as top heavy in the draft this season, and the front office just showed that they can identify talent in the draft too with Emmanuel Quickly. He was phenomenal, and we kind of have to wait. We got to wait and see what they can do with Obi Toppin, because Randall's playing well. He's been out early on in the season. So if they can land a top tier talent with the young guys that they have, I think that builds a little bit more in the future too, because look at what New Orleans is doing right now. Look at what Philadelphia has done. They got young guys. Boston, we just got done talking about them. Similar thing, where they identify top tier talent, and now people want to come play with them because not only are they winning, but they have those franchise players.
Right. I have two questions for you. For first one would be, who are they projected to get? Let's just say they don't. If they were to get the 8th seed, let's say they get the 9th seed or 7th seed, who are they projected to get? I'm not sure at this moment. Obviously, it's going to change as the season progresses. But what kind of guy can they actually get with that type of seed? Are they going to end up in the lottery with that?
Typically, if you make the playoffs, you're not going to be a lottery team. Now, granted, they do have Dallas's pick too.
That's
so
what I'm saying. I wasn't
yeah.
sure what pick they had through other teams. So if you're not really going to get that type of guy, I'm not saying that you can't find a gem later on. I mean, we've seen throughout the drafts, there's tons of guys that end up being the steal of the draft or the face of the draft. That's not the number one pick. Don't get me wrong. I just feel like let's take a look at the history of the game. I feel like there's 3 ways you can look at the game. It's like analytics, then there's the eye test, and then the history of the game. What has the history told us? When has tanking truly really worked? And people will say, well, look at Golden State. They built through the draft. But if you look at what Golden State did, they didn't necessarily tank. They just drafted really well. And it's like, so when is the Philly, have we really seen the process finish? Like, we haven't. We're still waiting for it to kind of click. We don't even know if these guys are meant to be together. They're saying trade Embiid or trade Simmons. And then the Pelicans aren't looking like they should. And is it that a coaching issue? I'm not sure. And even then, they didn't acquire Brandon Ingram through the draft. They traded for him.
Right.
Correct.
So when is tanking really work?
That's a good question, and we actually had that exact same conversation, and Jurgen and I pointed to Philly, and again, we just all got done saying that ring culture kind of puts like a little stigma in what success actually means. Like right now, Philadelphia is number 1 team in the East right now. Like granted, that doesn't get you a ring right now, but you got to start somewhere. So they finally and what really got them over the top wasn't the talent of Embiid and Simmons. It was the head coaching change. They got rid of Brett Brown, who had developed that losing culture where he was like, okay, we'll lose and lose. all right, now guys, all of a sudden I'm going to magically be able to tell you how to win. They bring in, Doc Rivers, who has won a ring, but the players are still largely the same.
Right.
Yeah.
So it again, you can skin this so many different ways, and that's why it's hard. That's why there's no proven way to do it. So again, I was just curious to see what your philosophy and take is on there, and very well educated. And I like the fact that you brought up the 3 ways that you can look at the game. I've looked at it like that, but I've never really articulated in that manner before.
Well, yeah, because I give my opinion on so many different things. So it's because that's kind of my job. But the least I could do is like do my homework. I don't want to just say, okay, this doesn't work. So I'm like, I use that theory with the Brooklyn Nets, and I was like, okay, let's look at the stats. Like stats, obviously they're amazing, but if you look at the stats, KD and James Harden are actually better when Kyrie's not on the floor. So I'm like, okay, let's look at the eye test. I'm like, okay, both of them need the ball, but it doesn't seem to really work when all 3 of them are on the court. But talent-wise, you could probably override everything because how talented they are. So then I looked at the history of the game, and I was like, when have we ever seen – we've seen 3 stars work, right? You've had that in Miami, you've had it in Boston, you've had it in Golden State. But when have you ever seen the best player take that tertiary role, that third role? Because in Golden State, it wasn't a ball-dominant offense. It was a motion offense. But in this, your James Harden and Kyrie need the ball. We've never seen that work before.
Right.
Because in Miami, Chris Bosh took the third role.
Yeah.
And then in Boston, obviously, we know who took the third role. So we've never seen that before. So I'm like, man, if you look at it through that lens, I think Brooklyn needs to trade Kyrie Irving. And so that's kind of where I came up with that theory.
Makes sense.
Right on. And it's interesting, too, just to that point, to see how James Harden has turned into the de facto point guard. He just had, I think, like 15 assists last night. It was insane.
Crazy.
It was a really great game on his part. But all right, so Max, we have a couple fun little games. We just had Ronnie Brewer on earlier in the week, and for those who listened on the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio, we got to hear about Ronnie's incredible story, incredible journey, all the great coaches and players that he got to work with and alongside. But we skipped one of our favorite games here on the show is pass or shoot. Now, Max, it's basically yes, it's a yes or no, but it's a basketball show, so we got to make it basketball related. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask you 3 trade-based questions, and if you agree with it, you shoot. If you don't agree with it, you pass. All right, y'all ready?
All right, I am a shooter though, so I have to give you a heads up. I do shoot the ball. So okay, we'll see.
we'll see. You may pull a James Harden and turn into an assist machine here. There we go. All right, so first one, Max. Pass or shoot, Bradley Beal gets dealt this season.
Pass. I think he needs to, but pass.
What holds him up from getting traded?
That whole situation is just so weird. It's like I don't ever like to speak on something I don't truly know. So it's so hard because we know very little. It's like he shouldn't want to be there, right? It's like you're not getting the accolades, even though you're putting up the stats, and you're not getting the win. And so it's like typically when a player doesn't receive both, you're like, okay, he just wants it for the money. But if you look at Bradley Beal and you look at his character, you're like, oh, he's not that type of guy who just wants the money. He seems like a guy who wants to win. He's a real good guy. And the way players talk about him. So for the record, it doesn't mean you're a bad guy if you want the money. But
sure, I know what you mean.
But I feel like Bradley Beal wants to be traded, but every time he has an interview or an opportunity to utilize his leverage, he doesn't. And so with that confusion, and what are they going to get in return for Beal? What teams can really make a realistic trade package for him? I just don't feel we're going to see it. I personally want to see it for not only him, but a team to see. It's just interesting to see players of different teams, and I think he could really benefit a team to win a title. And I want to see him in that situation, kind of like what we're seeing with Devin Booker and Chris Paul. Finally, we get that with Devin Booker, but I just don't see it happening. So I'm going to say pass.
Okay, fair enough, Jurgen. Max just passed to you. You shooting or you passing it?
My only thing is that when you add that he gets dealt this season, that's the only part that kind of like sticks with me. Because I'm on Max's side fully. Like, I think he should get dealt, and I would love to see him get dealt this season, especially to one of these playoff teams or teams trying to claw back in. But like, what team can create a realistic package like that? That's the major question. Like, you have some teams that are kind of gun shy because some teams just do value first round picks at the end of the day or try to stick with it with some of the players they have. Some teams, maybe they don't think they have the assets for some reason. Like, they're like, teams always get gun shy when it comes to pulling off that trade. And so that's the only reason why I'm going to pass it here, because what team is going to go full, like, all chips to the table? Like, all right, 30-point per game score, come to us. We're going to put out this many people on the roster, pick and choose what you want, add some picks, and boom. Like, it has to be something like that. Like, how many teams are willing to do that? I can only maybe think of one or two. Like, that's why I'm going to say pass.
You're going to want to win now. And like someone like Jerry West could pull it off. I don't see it.
And they had to give up so many assets anyway in that Paul George deal. So it's like,
right.
Kind of handicapped themselves from getting that third star to an extent. All
right. So y'all are a little trigger shy today. I'll shoot. I think that there are a couple teams that can and should. And I think that out of the three, I got three just off the top of my head that I think could. Denver, I think that Denver could. They have the assets, they have the cap space, they have the salaries to be able to match it with guys like a Will Barton. You got Gary Harris. Yeah, Gary Harris. I'm sorry. I always get him and Gary Neal mixed up. Gary Neal doesn't even play basketball anymore, so I always find myself saying that name. So you got Gary Harris, you've got Will Barton, and then you have a Michael Porter Jr. or a Bull, a nice young prospect, and they got draft picks that they can throw their way as well. So, and you got, RJ Hampton. So there are some young guys that you can put out there, a Monte Morris backup point guard who could come in and probably even give you starting minutes if you need it. So Denver, they have pieces. I look at a team like Memphis. How nasty would a Ja Morant, Bradley Beal backcourt be? And they have, your Justice Winslow's, your Dylan Brooks's, your Jonas Valanciunas contracts that you can get in there and match it. They have a couple young guys that they can put in that deal too, and they have most of their draft picks. And then I look at the Atlanta Hawks. Now, I'm a little shy to think that they would do this because they're within the same division. But man, Collins has an expiring contract. Do they want to renew that when they're going to be looking to, pay, Ice Trey here soon, Trey Teal, whichever nickname you want to call him. And they got the salaries to be able to match it. You got, DeAndre Hunter, if you want to put him in a deal. You got Cam, if you want to put him in a deal. You got Danilo Gallinari for salary matching. You got so many guys on that Atlanta team that may feel like they're Bradley Beal away from making legitimate steps. So I think that there are a couple teams that could make that deal and should. If I was in charge, I would. All right, Max. So we got two more deals that we're going to go through. So we're going from Bradley Beal to now Kemba Walker gets dealt out of Boston. Are you passing or shooting?
It's a tough one. I personally want to shoot it. I really do. But they're going to pass it. Because if we look at, in my opinion, Kevin McHale, not Kevin McHale, I'm sorry, Danny Ainge. He has a history of being kind of hesitant with these trades. And he doesn't always pull the trigger when I feel like he should. And if you look at what they've lost versus what they've gotten in return, you're like, man, why wouldn't you have traded? You could have gotten so much with these assets that you ended up eventually losing, but he's kind of trigger shy. So that being said, I think they're going to be patient with him, and I think they're going to wait. And I feel like they have a championship team. And so if he just plays a little bit better, we're right there. I think they hold on to him.
Okay, fair enough. Jerk, how do you feel? Pass or shoot?
Well, I'll say this, like with you, Steven, if it was up to me, I would shoot on this, even if I'm the Celtics. After seeing what's happened so far this season, I've convinced myself that Kemba Walker is going to be, if not the primary reason, then the next primary reason of why the Celtics will lose in a playoff series to one of the top tier teams in the league. I know he's been injured, like some lingering stuff, but just some of these bad performances that we've seen from him. And I was always kind of bullish on him on the defensive end. Like, I know Brown and Tatum are there, but Kemba's starting to give me some Isaiah Thomas vibes from his time in Boston. If it was up to me personally, I would shoot, but I'm going to pass for the one simple reason, and Max brought it up, Danny Ainge, because I think Kemba has now reached a point, and maybe this is just my point of view, and if it is, I will stand alone on this and maybe catch a boat to Cruise Island for all our Off the Ball Network fans watching this. But I think to move Kemba, I think you need to actually give a team a first-round pick to take on that salary for the next 3 years. I really do. Like, if and some of the teams that we talked about, Steven, like, if hypothetically, if you want to try to get, if you're Boston, you want to try to get like Andre Drummond, Cleveland has no reason to want to have Kemba Walker, not only because of the salary, they already have Sexton and Garland. Like, they just figured out how to make it work with them. Now you want to bring in a third guard who you kind of have to start because of that salary? Like, what team would want to give up their young assets? Like, Would Charlotte somehow trade back for him? That'd be wild if it happened, but like,
Would be nuts.
would they? Like, and then you have Hayward and Kemba there. Do they want to pay the luxury tax when like they're kind of in that Knicks tier where it's like they're better this season, what we've expected? What's the long term looking like? Like, it's various things to where in my mind I'm like, he's not that enticing. So me personally, I'm gonna pass it back to you, Steven.
And I'm going to pass it to, I guess, just the ether. I don't think that – I think the salary is really what's going to do it. And they do have that massive trade exception that they can still use that they got with that Gordon Hayward situation. So I don't think that they have to marry, Kemba to any sort of trade to bring someone back in. But it was just curious because it's been rumored for a little while that Kemba might find his way out. But I think, like Jerg, what you said, I think that you're going to have to incentivize a team to bring him on instead of looking for a team that is just dying to have him. So, all right, Max, last one that we have for pass or shoot. Zach LaVine gets dealt.
In a row. Yeah, I'm two passes in a row. I haven't shot the ball yet.
Zach LaVine, here's your chance. Do you think he gets dealt?
No. I'm going to pass again. I want him to. So all three of these, I want to shoot the ball, but I keep making these passes because the Bulls don't really have a lot going for them, but what they do have going for them is him and Kobe. And so Kobe. So if you have both of them, I don't see them wanting to get rid of their best player, their young player. And at the end of the day, it also is a business. And Zach LaVine best put butts in seats, not only his dunks, but his performances, his points. He's such a dynamic player. So for so many different reasons, like I said, business perspective, the style of play side of things, your future, I don't think they do. But again, this is like a very similar situation with Bradley Beal. I would love to see him with an organization where it's like, man, I want to see him on that big stage, make those big plays. Because I actually had an opportunity to interview him, and he's an awesome guy. And I just think he could really benefit that team that's just trying to get over the hump. You got Denver, and that was a really good point bringing up Denver because I think they could use someone like that. But no, I think he stays. So I'm going to pass the ball.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Jurgen, what do you think?
We have forced a shooter to turn into a passer tonight. I'm
James Harden. He is reborn.
But right. But Max, I've passed it to Steven both times. A little hockey assist type of thing to try to do it. I'm actually going to shoot this one here.
Okay.
Try to be different, first of all. But second, the team that both of you have mentioned. And I'm just going to steal this real quick. I think the Denver Nuggets, if your trade package, like let's say they make the trade package to Bradley Beal and Washington's like, we need a little more. What I would personally do then, I would call up Chicago and try to get it like this. Like, as great as Zach LaVine has been for that team, like they are not on the Knicks or the Hornets to where it's like, we have seen a little bit this season where you can say, maybe we should give Julius Randle a contract extension. Gordon Hayward seems a little more worth the money now than what everyone was saying when he first signed it. Which, by the way, if the Knicks were in the Bulls' case of a 5-6 win team, I think you trade Julius Randle playing at this level because you need to maximize your value on a player that realistically, if we don't think the Bulls are going to be able to fix this for another 2 to 3 years, like all depends on perspective, but let's say it takes them 2 to 3 more years. Zach LaVine, like I think he's just about entered his prime already. So now you have wasted 2 to 3 years of his prime to finally become maybe a mid-level playoff team at best. So I think if you can maximize his value, which I think we can all agree the highest his value will ever be is now. Like if you can get a team like Denver to give you like a Michael Porter Jr. back in the deal, or if you can go to an Atlanta and swing a deal with them because they don't like Lauri Markkanen. Who's to say Atlanta, Chicago, John Collins goes back to Chicago in that deal, along with either Reddish or Hunter. Both their skill sets are too similar, and that like the shooting and small forward rooms are so crowded, you can trade one of them and get a player back like a LaVine. Like I'm going to shoot just because there are teams that can make great trade packages that should entice Chicago to give up LaVine. Because if you would have told me 2 to 3 years ago, you can maybe get 2 to 3 first-round picks back or 2 first-round picks and 2 really good prospects back for LaVine, I wouldn't have thought that because we didn't see anything yet. Now it's wholly realistic. Like, okay, we can flip him, get some picks back, get some pretty good young players back that we could work with. I shoot that one.
That's a great point. That is a great point. I'll let you go before I say something crazy.
Okay, well, I'll make it quick. I'm going to pass it to you, Max, and I'm going to say that they don't, and here's why. The play-in tournament. Right now, the Bulls are the 11th seed. In Chicago, I think that they would love to be able to be in a play-in tournament, the inaugural one where the 9th and the 10th seed they're going to be in there. Gives their team a little bit more exposure on the national media. And I think that there's going to be a way that they're going to look at that situation and think that they could be in there. But Max, go ahead, man. What was your point?
Looks like you're leading the team in scoring, Dawgan. I'm going to say I've really believed in this. I'm going to say it now because we brought up the Hawks a couple of different times. I believe the Hawks are going to make the finals in a couple of years. Like, I think they're the team of the East, like, for the future. And obviously we look at Dallas, who you could say is maybe having a little bit of a disappointing season compared to expectations, because our expectations are everything. But I think Dallas is the future of, like, the West. And then for the East, I'm a huge believer in the Atlanta Hawks. So if the Atlanta Hawks were able to pull up something with Zach LaVine, that would be ridiculous. With Trae Young, Zach LaVine, and the young talent that they have, I love the direction Atlanta's heading in. So just want to be on record with your show saying that, because I really do believe that's the team of the future.
Absolutely, William. You have them picking up LaVine. I have them picking up Bill. I mean, Atlanta, if you're listening, you got the assets. Go make a move, and you can be that team in the future. And Max, it's funny you bring that up because their front office is from Golden State, and they're doing a lot of the same, developmental steps in their process to be able to go and compete for championships for years to come, right?
Yeah, I don't want to say next Golden State because that was like all-time stuff. So I'm not saying they're going to be the greatest team of all time. But they're on that path of being the next Golden State as far as building through the way you're talking about. So I really do see that.
Yeah, they have that upward trajectory, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Max. Well, the last game that we're going to play here is our conference big three. I went through here with Austin already, and we have our conference big three. What I'll do for you, Max, is I will let you know who we have as our top 3 teams in each conference. And basically the way this works is it's not just who are the best, 3 teams, 1 through 3 in the standings. It's, who they've beaten, who they've lost to, what was our expectations of this team coming in, their current streaks and stuff like that. So it's a living, breathing thing. It's not just Googling, NBA standings and putting the top 3 teams. So in the East, we have the Philadelphia 76ers, number 1. They haven't moved up or down at all, or I mean, down, obviously. They're 18-9. They have a 2-game losing streak. Second, we have the Milwaukee Bucks, who have also stayed second. They're 16-10 on a 2-game losing streak. And then the Nets kind of supplanted last night the Boston Celtics, who we're going to put in, who they just lost to the Wizards. And then the Nets just beat the Warriors. So we were going to have the Celtics third, but we have the Nets there. They stay there from last week, who are 16-12, and they're on a 2-game win streak. Max, what do you think of our Eastern Conference Big Three?
Can you say the Big Three one more time?
We have Sixers, Bucks, Nets.
Okay. So I'm going to disagree with you with one of them. And that is I'm going to replace the Bucks with Boston. So I'd have Brooklyn, Boston, and Philly. I've never been sold on Milwaukee. Covering the Magic, I got to interview Giannis, which I absolutely love. So I'm a firm believer in Giannis because I love he has a trait that you can't put on a stat, like his desire to be great and his hunger and love for basketball, I think means so much when you evaluate the all-timers. And so I'm a firm believer in Giannis, but I'm just not sold on their style of play to win and really win a championship, because we've seen it time and time again. It's the Giannis train, and I've compared him to George Foreman. It's like, yeah, they have that left hook, and if you get hit by that left hook, you're done. But once you kind of figure it out, there's not multiple layers to this team, in my opinion. Picking up Drew Holiday was unbelievable, but I think Boston is more of like a Muhammad Ali. You look at Brooklyn. I haven't done Brooklyn yet, but there's just layers to it. You got the jab, you got the cross, you got the footwork, you got the role players, you got the coach. I'm not sold on the Bucks, because once you create that wall and you stop Giannis, you're expecting these role players to play outside of their role, and you're expecting them to do more than what they're accustomed to doing all season long. So it happens time and time again in the playoffs. And I just feel like when you keep seeing something, why am I going to expect a different result when their pattern hasn't changed? And so even though they have Drew Holiday, which like I said, I really do like, one of the most underrated players in the league, I'm just not sold on the Bucks. So in the postseason, for me, I have Brooklyn going to the finals off pure talent. I think they lack depth and they lack defense, but when you have 3 guys who can give you 40 each, sometimes that just isn't normal. So it just kind of overrides everything. Philly's clicking. We talked about the head coach, so I like Philly. Still don't think we've seen best from Simmons, and then obviously
Mhm.
Embiid's having an MVP season. And then I like Boston. I really like Jaylen Brown because that duo is the best young duo in the league because you can argue one is better than the other.
Yeah. And not to mention, too, Harris is having a tremendous season for Philadelphia as well.
Yeah.
All right. And then, Max, in our Western Conference, our big three, we have the Utah Jazz, number one. They have actually moved up a spot from last week. They are 22-5 on a 7-game win streak. The Los Angeles Lakers have moved down one. They were number one last week. They are now second. They are 21-6 on a 7-game win streak. And then, brand new to our big three, the Phoenix Suns have moved up to the third spot. They're 16-9 on a 5-game win streak. Jerg, I want to get your take on this real quick.
I was high on the Suns going into the season, so to hear that they have made it there, personal pride. But I would still have to put the Clippers in the top three. I know they maybe haven't been as impressive as most, but like my thing is, and I think Max was thinking it with how he placed his three. At the end of the day, I have to think of the playoffs. And so while I love Phoenix, while I love what Chris Paul has done, I got to place the Clippers above them, and I got to put the Lakers above the Jazz. Respectfully to Utah, like the fact they're doing so well is great. I love the fact that a market like them is seeing this kind of success. But at the end of the day, there is no team that I've seen yet in the Western Conference that's going to convince me you're going to beat LeBron and AD 4 times out of 7. And that's ultimately what I'm going to hang my hat on. Again, respect to Phoenix and Utah, but I got to go with the established Western powers that we've seen since going back to last season.
I'm just going to push back a little bit, and I'll hand it right to you, Max. You gotta penalize Los Angeles for just kind of daydreaming through the season a little bit. Like Anthony Davis, kind of meh. Like he's still having a good season, but he's not 80 right now. Right. LeBron James has been phenomenal, but there's still. I don't think that you should sleepwalk when you have, half of your roster is brand new. Max, what do you think?
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think we've seen. Obviously, the Clippers are an example of this, where it's like, oh, this team is so great. They're the powerhouse of the West, and we're going to be fine. And then if you sleepwalk for too long, it's going to come back and bite you. So I definitely agree with that. But all that being said, I'm going to agree with you, sir. The Lakers are my number one. I have them repeating and winning a championship. I would go Clippers number 2, and then I would go Utah Jazz. And shout out to Kendrick Perkins, too, because he always was talking about the Suns and how he believed in them. And they really have played fantastic basketball. And I think what Chris Paul has done, he deserves his flowers for just keep on going to all these different organizations and just changing their cultures. And so impressive to me. But back to what is it all about? You're trying to win a championship. So if I look at it, who's realistically giving the best opportunity to win a championship? It's the Lakers because I think they win it. And I think the Clippers and I think the Jazz. I think the Jazz are just clicking on all cylinders right now. They have that momentum.
Yep.
Everyone knows their role. They're well coached. They have depth. So all that being said, I would put the Jazz third in there. But yeah, Lakers, Clippers, Jazz.
Fair enough, and all fair points. Again, this is throughout the season. It's taking into consideration who's beating who's losing to who. And right now, I think that the Suns, they've beaten some really good teams.
Oh, yeah.
I think that the Utah Jazz, they just beat the Bucks, who we just got done mentioning in our Eastern Conference, right? So a lot of interesting ways that you can dissect this, but ultimately that's just the way that we here on the show do it. But all respect to you that at the end of the day, the ring is king, right? So that's it for the show, though, guys. Max, just want to appreciate you for taking some time out of your busy schedule. Really appreciate it. We got to do this again sometime, man. But before we let you go, just tell the folks where they can find you on social media and some of the stuff that you have going on with you that they can kind of keep up with.
Right. No, this is fantastic. Seriously, thank you guys for having me on. Anytime you want me on, I would absolutely love to. And if you guys ever want to come on my show, you're more than welcome to. And I love the way you guys mixed up these different segments because it's like we're all watching the same thing, but we're finding different ways to talk about it and finding different ways to view it. And I thought it was real creative what you guys did. I really enjoyed it. As far as where you can find me, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, Max Van Auken, and that's a kind of unique last name. So it's VAN space AUKEN. My podcast is available there. Link is in the bio, and that's available on any podcast platform: Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, also on YouTube. And then, everything else I'm doing, like I said, I pretty much post Twitter and Instagram seem to be just kind of like the holy grail of everything when it comes to just building your platform and building your brand. So if you follow me on those two things, you'll pretty much be able to find anything you need about me.
Excellent. Well, good stuff, Max. And Jurgen, what a treat it was to have Max on today, right?
Absolutely. I loved it. It was awesome.
Yeah. And as for us, you can follow Jurg at JurgK40 on Twitter. And that's the same on Instagram, correct?
Yep. Keep it
All right.
simple.
Yep. Perfect. Got it. And then as for myself, you can follow me at StephenBTG on Twitter. That BTG stands for Breaking the Game, which is the name of the show that you're listening to right now on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. You can follow me on Instagram at Stephen W. Gillespie. And you can follow the show itself on both platforms at BTG NBA Pod. Be sure to go and look up Breaking the Game anywhere you get your podcasts. Download, subscribe, share, rate, and review. 5 stars helps a lot more than you will ever know. So please take the time out of your day. Go do that. Write us something nice in a review. But for our special guest, Max, for the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio, for the Off the Ball Network, where you can go to offtheballnetwork.com for all of your sports needs, go and do that. For my special guest, Jerg, for Austin, who can't be here today, and for myself, we have been the Breaking the Game show. We will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.